Hi, I'm Jeremy, and today I'm going to show you a game by the name of First Class, and this comes from publisher Hamza Gluck and designer Helmut Ohley. And this is the publisher and designer duo that was behind a game, one of my favorite games from the last few years, by the name of Russian Railroads, and that was a worker placement game, and this is almost a card adaptation of that game, a card game adaptation of that. It's not a worker placement game, it's a card drafting game, but it has much of the same feel, and it plays in a slightly shorter time. The box here says 20 minutes per player, which sounds about right. It's for 2 to 4 players, ages 10 and up. Let me take a minute to show you how the game plays, and I'll come back and let you know what I think about it. So I've set up here the rough setup for a game of First Class, and I should note that I'm not going to explain every rule in this game. I just want to give you an overview of how it plays. And essentially what the game has you doing is competing with other players to build an Orient Express. So each player is going to get a player board, which looks like this. At the start of the game, and you can see it has these areas here, here, and here where you're going to be adding cards, as well as down here. So really this is just an organizational tool, and there are a few main areas. First of all, there's this area here where you're going to be storing coins that you gather over the course of the game, and you have to put these on the board from bottom to top, from left to right. So you would fill it up, and then as soon as this column is filled, you can start filling this column. So that's it on this board. Second of all, you're going to have this area here, which might make more sense if I lay it down on the table, and you can see that this area here is going to have these 2 locomotives here, as well as these 2 starter train cars, which are value 0, and this is going to represent 2 of your locomotives in your train company. And over the course of the game, you're going to be adding cards to this area to extend your locomotives, as well as upgrading your cards. So you can flip them over to upgrade the point value that they could potentially score you during the scoring rounds. So they go from 0 to 1 to 2 to 4 to 7, up to a maximum of 12 points per car by upgrading them. So you can see that there's these 2-sided cards which will advance in points over the course of the game. The trick is that these will only score if your engineer has moved past them. So for example, if I flip both of these cards to 1, but at the end of a scoring round my engineer is only here, only this card would score. Whereas if he was here, both of these cards would be able to be scored because the engineer has passed that far. So advancing your engineer, building out your train, those are going to be 2 of the main things that you're going to be doing during the course of the game. The third thing I would say is advancing this little train meeple that you get, advancing it along this track this way. This just represents your train's progress across the Orient Express. So you're going to be building out the individual locomotives and planning your route. So you'll notice that on this board there are these individual spaces here, and let me just allow you to get a better look at those. So your train's going to start here and start moving along in sequence along those spots. And there are 2 different types of spaces generally on these spaces. First of all, there are these which show a number of points. You'll score those immediately as soon as your train hits those. Then there are going to be cards here that show this stopwatch, and you are going to be scoring those every scoring round as long as your train has passed that, or has reached or passed that space. So for example, if my train was here on the 3, I would get the 3 points right away, but then every scoring round I would get 2 coins as depicted on here. So over the course of the game, you're going to be able to add cards this way to extend the route to give you potentially more bonuses and more spaces for that train to travel over the course of the game. And this area down here simply is going to be where you store cards as you pick them up over the course of the game, because there are some bonus cards. For example, you'll start with one that will give you bonus points at the end of the game for collecting certain types of cards. So for example, every time I take a card that allows me to advance my little conductor on my train, it will be worth 4 points at the end of the game if I have this card here, and these are kept secret. So that might differentiate your game versus the other players somewhat. So the way that the game works is it's going to be played over 3 it's going to be played over 6 rounds, and after every second round there's going to be a scoring phase, and then there'll be a final scoring at the end of the game. The player who has the most points is going to win. And what you do on your turn, and you're going to get 3 turns per round, is you're simply going to take 1 card from this area here that shows the various action cards. So these are generally broken into several different types. So for example, this guy here, he allows you to advance your engineers, so that's one type. A second type allows you to advance your train at the top of your player board here. Left, the number of spaces that's depicted on there. So that's the second type. And then the third main type are going to be these. I guess these are your train depot cards. And these will allow you to add cards to your locomotive sections that you're building over the course of the game or upgrade them. So for example, here I would be allowed to add a 0 and then upgrade a 0 to a 1. One thing to note is that your values always have to be higher on the left than descend over the course of your train. So I could not have this one here be a 1 if this one was still a 0. So always left to right, you're going to be upgrading your train values. And if you've played the game Russian Railroads, it's very similar to that. So over the course of the game, you're going to be drafting these cards from the pool. So let's say I take this card, and let's say we're playing a 2-player game. The one kink in the rules is that from these initial 6 cards in a row, as soon as you've removed a number of cards equal to the number of players, then you are going to discard that entire row. So let's say I've taken that card, and then the second player, he takes this card. That would then eliminate all of these cards, restricting my choices for my next 2 picks. So there's a nice way that scales based on the number of players that you have, even though you're always going to have 18 cards to pick from at the start of the round. The other thing that you could choose to pick from, instead of taking one of these cards, is you could take this start player marker. If you ever do that, you just automatically discard the top left card in the display, which could trigger a whole row getting discarded. And then you'll immediately give out these rewards. So the person who takes it gets 2 coins. Nothing for the person who will be the new second player, but third and fourth player will be able to upgrade their locomotives somewhat as depicted here. So that is basically the way that the game is going to go. After each player's taken 3 cards, all of the rows will be cleared. You'll deal out the second half of your round 1, round 2, or round 3 deck, and then after that you're going to do a scoring. And during the scoring, what you're going to score is you're going to score any of your locomotive sections based on where your engineers are. So they'll score this card they're on and any earlier cards. You'll score any of the stopwatches that you have, and then you'll go into the next round. There are some bonuses that you could have during the course of the game. At the start of the game, each player is going to get several of these cards that show the number 6. As soon as you've placed down your 5th card in one of your 2 railways, you could place down immediately for free one of these cards, which will give you an immediate one-time bonus. The second type are these, which are communal, and these are your 10th card. These commemorate the end of your train, so a train can't be more than 10 cards long, but your 10th card will be free. It will give you a large number of points, which does decrease over the course of the game, as well as some card upgrades, and this means that simply you could upgrade any card value up 1 step. So once you have those 10 cards in your locomotive, the first, second, and third player to get their engineer to that 10th card by advancing him along will get 20, 10, and then 5 points. And the same player could score more than one of these if they advance both of their trains all the way to the end. So those are some bonuses. Also, there are endgame bonuses. So again, based on the number of cards of a particular type that you have at the end of the game, you'll just look at the multiplier that you have here and score that many points. So that encourages you to specialize somewhat. So that is basically how the game works. You're going to be also, I should note, having these coins that you could have. You could spend those to augment your action. So over the course of the game, you'll be collecting coins in these 3 columns. And based on the column that you take the coin from, you can do free actions on your turn to either upgrade your or add 0 cards to your train, move your conductor, or upgrade any card. The catch is that you have to fill these in from left to right. So if you can't do this action until this column has been filled and you start filling in coins here. So that is another strategic element of the game. So that's the basic game, and the way that the game works is it comes with 5 modules, and you'll have the option to include 2 of those 5 modules every time that you play. And those modules are going to basically give you different types of cards added to this tableau. I've explained the basic ones, but some of the extra types that you would get. For example, in Module A, there are contract cards. So the way that these work is when you take them, you simply add them next to your player board, and then at another time, if you fulfill or exceed the requirement that's listed here, so for example, if you have a 7, a 4, and a 3 value train on your locomotive next to each other, then you would get the bonus that's shown here, so some points and some train movements. Or for example here, if you have at least 2 1 trains on the top and 2 1 trains on the bottom, you'll get some free upgrades. So that's how those contracts work. Those are the main feature of Module A. Module B, they have, I would say, 2 distinctive features. So first of all, they have this ability here to play these multipliers. So you could slide those underneath the card, and then during the scoring rounds, what you're going to do is you'll score the points shown on that train card doubled. So that could be quite lucrative if you manage to upgrade that all the way to the 12 train. That will double every round. Every scoring round, rather. The other things, and I should have explained this before, is when you're moving your locomotive here, you have the option to take these cards here to add to your route. So just like this, you could build up the number of spaces that your locomotive can go. And that potentially could give you extra clock actions, which will pay out again every round. So just like these pay out in points every round, these will pay out in extra actions every round. So one of the features in Module B are these little multipliers, which you could slide behind a card like so, and then you would get this bonus twice every time there's a scoring round. So that's one of the main features of Module B, along with these score multipliers. So I would say those are the 2 main distinctions of Module B. And then Module C, the way that those work, this is essentially a whodunit, and introduces these clue tokens into the board. At the start of the game, everybody will get one of these cards, which identifies them as a killer or not. And the person who has the most clue tokens at the end of the game is going to be arrested by the police and immediately eliminated from the game. So these are high value actions, but they come at the cost of accumulating these tokens. So it's sort of like the skullduggery actions in Lords of Waterdeep. You want to take these because they're valuable, but you run the risk of getting eliminated from the game if you get too greedy with them. So that's a nice variation as well. I haven't yet used the last 2 modules, but I could tell just from playing with these first 3 that they do add a lot of variety in the game. So I think I'll stop there, and I'll just say that this is generally how you're going to be playing the game Orient Express, or First Class rather, and if you've played Russian Railroads, it's very similar in how you're going to be building out your train lines and trying to also make sure that you're capable of scoring them. So I'll stop there and go back and give you my final thoughts. Okay, so that is First Class, and you'll have to forgive me for not going into every rule, but it is a pretty complicated game, especially once you start stacking in the modules into a rules explanation. But I think I've shown you basically how the game works, and it works by having you trying to develop several competing interests at the same time while having your action selection limited by other players. So in a sense, it does feel like a worker placement game, even if it's not a worker placement game. Over the course of the game, you're trying to upgrade your trains, you're trying to make your engineers advance so you will score your trains, and you're trying to plan your route so you could get those bonus actions every scoring round. So trying to balance all those things is really where the meat of the game goes, and that's a pretty satisfying feeling for me. The game feels very similar to Russian Railroads, but it does play I would say quicker. The one thing that I would point out as a downside, though, is because of its card-based nature, it does seem to be a little bit fiddlier. Each player is going to need a substantial amount of table space because they have their player board, which is normal size, but then they're going to be adding up to 10 cards going off the side, as well as cards going off the top and other cards that they're going to be collecting. And you'll also need a large section of the board or of the table to house all those communal cards that you'll be drafting, as well as all the bonus things. So even though it's a card game, it probably takes up at least as much table space, if not more, than Russian Railroads did. And I would say that I've played Russian Railroads enough that I feel that I've explored some of that game's game space, and so this, even though it feels similar, it feels different enough that it's satisfying in a new way. It almost feels like an expansion map to me, to having played Russian Railroads. Since Russian Railroads is one of my favorite games, and I've only played this a few times so far, I would still say if you were trying to decide between the two, I would say pick Russian Railroads. But this one is a strong contender, for your time. It really is satisfying. I've only played 3 of the modules so far, but I was surprised at how much introducing that third module changed the game versus the first 2 that I played with. And I'm really looking forward to exploring the other 2. Russian Railroads does have some expansion maps already out for it. This does not yet, but there's expandability in the box already. So it's definitely a gamer's game. It's heavier than you might think when you hear card version of Russian Railroads, which is me just being glib. But it's a game that I think is going to reward repeated plays, and it's a game that I think is going to have a lot of value in the box. So it's a game that I would recommend, and it's a game that recalls one of my favorite Euros from recent years. What's not to like? So those are my thoughts on First Class, and thanks for watching.